people are expecting. People are expecting quite a bit.
This is your time.
You want to win. You're going to be like this.
There are no shortcuts in life.
You'll get better because you make each other better.
The inches we need are everywhere around us.
I know plenty of people that are capable. I know fewer people that are willing.
You have to believe it to do it.
Now, what are you going to do?
Welcome, everybody, to Sideline Sessions on the B Podcast Network. So pleased to have you here with us as always. And it's going to be another great episode here. We have a great guest that is going to share a lot of interesting insights and ideas around mental skills training that are really valuable for athletes of all ages and levels. And particularly, we'll talk about the young athletes that many of you are supporting. So my guest is Robert Castillo. He's a certified mental performance coach with the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. Robert has over 15 years of experience working with elite military service members, Major League Baseball, NBA, Major League Soccer players, coaches, college athletes, business executives, bringing to the table not only years of knowledge in research-based mental performance, but also over a decade of experience in improving people's quality of life. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Ross.
Yeah, amazing. So to give our listeners some context, can you just describe a little bit more about what the work is that you do in the mental skills space and how you got into it?
Yeah. So I was a youth athlete. I played, a bunch of different sports growing up, but the sport I stuck with most was soccer. And got to play 2 games in college. I blew out my knee, and I've had 5 knee surgeries, a couple in high school and then and a couple in college. And my 3rd game in, so technically I guess 2.5 games in college, I hurt my knee again. And a sports psychology consultant went to talk to the whole athletic department. It wasn't just me, but they came to talk to him. And, I mentioned I had some surgeries in high school, and actually I was headed towards the route of either physical therapy because I had done so much of it, or maybe even medicine, orthopedic surgery, right? I'm sure I put my orthopedic surgeon, his kids through college with the amount of surgeries I had. And, so the sports psychologist went and talked to the whole athletic department. And I was maybe 3 weeks post-op, of my last knee surgery. And he was telling a story, or not a story, it was actually some research that he had done that was talking about visualization. So creating a mental picture in your mind so they would show these injured, it wasn't just athletes, it was injured people that had injured ankles and injured knees. And they showed them white blood cells in a microscope and then had them visualize those blood cells going to the injured area. And they would take, blood measurements in those areas, pre and post visualization. And as you might imagine, they saw an increase in white blood cells, in the injured areas. I was a sophomore in college. I never went back and actually verified any of that research, but it had such a big impact on me that the next day I went and changed my major to psychology. And then I, very quickly knew not that I didn't only know that I wanted to study psychology, I wanted to get very specifically into sport psychology. And so I started looking up, and the, one of the biggest organizations in the world actually is this Applied Association for Sports Psychology. And in my junior year, I went to the conference in college. And again, I just, everything I was taking, like all my electives in my undergrad were focused on that. And then I was fortunate enough to get into, a master's degree program in counseling with an emphasis in athletic counseling. Right. So that'll kind of transition me into like talking a little bit about not just my background, how I got into it, but a little more about mental skills training. And so the way I can describe this, because as soon as you hear the word psychology, a lot of times we think mental health, and you think of clinical and disorders and things of that. Many people do, not everybody, but some people do. So the way I like to help differentiate is you're thinking of, if I was working with you, Ross, going up a rock climbing wall, and if I was wearing a counselor's hat, from a clinical perspective, I would ask you about your fears of heights and why you're scared about going up the rock climbing wall, right? And we would talk about things in your past to really help you overcome that, so that way you can tackle this, obstacle in front of you. I'm not a mentor either, right? So I'm not there to, show you the way, right? Meaning, if I was in that same scenario, if I was your mentor, I would tell you about my experience going up the rock climbing wall and what that was like, and what worked for me and what didn't work for me, and maybe give you some lessons learned, right? As a performance coach, as a performance consultant, I would just engage in a dialogue with you. What do you think is the best way to get up there? What are your concerns? What are your strengths that you're bringing to this table to tackle that challenge, right? And that's where I'm coming from, is giving people some tools and skills to help them tackle whatever's in front of them. Right? Yeah. And so my worldview is that of performance, right? So I always say is that not everything is a performance, but anything could be. Sport is inherent, performance is embedded in sport, but parenting can be a performance, right? School, even though there's grades, like we can view aspects of learning as a performance, right? And so depending on what you're trying to perform better at, we can apply these performance psychology or sports psychology principles to.
Got it. So I guess that a natural follow to that is regarding the mentality of the athlete, the kind of disposition, attitude, right, that they need to bring to the process of working with somebody who's going to support their mental skills training in order to get the best results.
Yeah. So, the way we try to get in with athletes in particular, and this also works with my military population, is how much of your performance or your sport is mental versus physical, right? And so you get a varying range of percentages, from 100% mental to 50-50 or even 10%, right? 10% of your sport is mental. But regardless of what percentage you deem your sport to be at, is how are you training that percentage deliberately and specifically to improve that attitude, the mindset, the confidence, the ability to deal with pressure, right? So we spend a lot of time, which we should, getting good at the sport itself, the technical aspects, the tactical aspects, studying game film, learning plays, trying to get better at our handles, our dribbles, whatever sport we're playing, right? And so we're spending a lot of time on that. And yes, there is a byproduct of getting better at those physical and technical, tactical aspects of your game that will have an influence on your mental, performance. However, it's not the whole ball game, right? There needs to be some deliberate training on the mental side, right? How do you deal with failure? How do you deal with success, right? Like, we're not deliberately taught those things. We learn by watching others. We learn by what our parents teach us, what our coaches teach us, by what our peers are doing. And we're picking up those strategies. And sometimes they're very helpful and sometimes they're not. But again, a lot of the way we're very deliberate about getting better at a particular aspect of our sport, we can apply that same principle to getting better at the deliberate aspect of our mental game, right?
Yeah.
And so that's trying to get them to understand that it's not a one, all or nothing or one versus the other. It's how can we put an emphasis on this part of the game? Because again, most of the time people are talking about it's 60% of the game. I actually met with a tennis player 2 days ago. She's a professional tennis player. You ask her what her strengths are, and she inherently goes to what all the things she's not doing well, the things she needs to get better at, why she's not as good as the other people in the league. And so this is a person that played Division I tennis and is now a professional athlete and still has these habits in terms of the way she thinks about herself and her abilities, right? So training that aspect very specifically will give an individual, or can give an individual, those tools to be able to overcome some of the obstacles that are in front of them.
Yeah. How much variability is there in the importance of mental skills for individual athletes? You know, for the athlete that believes the game is half mental versus maybe the one who thinks, yeah, it's only 5%. And I mean,
Yeah.
is there a lot of difference in how much emphasis individual athletes need to focus on it? Are there things that are, you know, more consistent that you found?
Yeah. So I'm gonna butcher the quote, but I'm sure you'll recognize even my butchered attempt at it. Is that winning cures everything, right?
Mhm.
If things are going good, we don't think about a lot of the things that might
Right.
be in our way or that we could do to improve our game. So many times I'm working with athletes that they are in a slump. Things aren't going well. So they could have that mindset of like it's only 5% of my game. Well, it matters if that 5% is having an extraordinary impact on your game, right? And so you're going to come see me. And then you have other individuals, and this is where I have a lot of fun, is where things are good, they just want to get better, right? And they have that mindset of like, even if my sport is, it's only 1% mental, I want to make sure I'm dialed in on that 1% because it's some percentage of my performance and the outcome I'm looking for. So yeah, so it only matters when it's having an impact on your, on your sport, on your outcome, on your win loss, on your percentages, or just feeling like you're having success. Right? I don't know
Yeah.
if that answers the question, but yeah, I'm agnostic to that, right? Like
Right.
if you believe, it doesn't matter, right? Because we know that that's what you're thinking has an impact on what you're doing, and what you're doing has an impact on what you're thinking. Right.
Right.
So like, and every athlete in of every sport will tell you we're different. We're a unique unicorn. Nobody else is like a baseball player. Nobody else is like a football player. Nobody else is like a soccer player or tennis player. And when you start talking to them about their challenges, obviously there are differences between sports. However, many of the challenges that arise are similar, right? It's a lot of the internal dialogue. It's a lot of, handling pressure, perfectionism, it's got to be perfect and those kinds of things. So yes, we are different, but the way the brain works and, the way our society and our culture are creates a lot of similarities across the board in terms of challenges.
Right. And I can imagine in a lot of athletes, when things are going well, not only are they not, identifying a problem, but also going to be a little resistant to anything that's going to take them out of that flow state, right? I mean, so many times when things are going well, it's because we feel like we're not thinking, we're
Right.
just doing, we're in a routine, right? We don't want to introduce other variables that might throw something a
Okay.
little bit off. Are there some most common challenges that athletes have where they do identify, you know what, I'm struggling with X and I could use some support on the mental part of my game?
Yeah, yes. I mean, there isn't any like this is what everybody experiences, but yeah, you do see quite a bit. Particularly, and this is true not just in sport. This is true in life. Transition, getting promoted, going from one level of your sport to the next level. Those transitions are ripe for self-doubt, more criticism, self-criticism, right? Measuring yourself against others. And then those kinds of situations can create, some unhelpful habits, some unhelpful perspective taking that can influence the way we're viewing ourselves as well as our ability to execute. So any kind of transitional state is going to not always, but can arise some of those things. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk about some of the particular
Yeah.
skills involved,
Yeah.
the mental skills. And there's obviously variety. It seems like one of the first ones that you likely would start off with, a new client, an athlete you're working with, you're figuring out what they want to focus on is that goal setting piece of what, but how does that look? What does that skill development look like, right? And particularly It's of course interesting the individual goal setting that athletes may have, whether they're a part of a team sport or individual sport, and but how this, is really a process of them kind of taking ownership, right, of what they
Yeah.
need to work on.
Yeah, and so you bring up a great point, because sometimes, particularly in teams, but even in individual sports, sometimes you have external, influences, coaches, parents, fans, maybe, depending on the
Mhm.
level you're playing at, that can influence our goal setting, right? On a team, you obviously have a collective goal, but then you have individual goals, right? You have those kinds of things, so it creates nuances. I actually would take one step back before we get into the goal setting. Is really I want to understand what kind of athlete a person wants to be. What kind of person do they want to be, right? Because those identity based values and beliefs are going to drive a lot of our goals, right?
Mhm.
And if we're not really connected to who we are or who we want to be, that's where you see goals, fall by the wayside, right? It's challenging, right? If I'm not a person that believes myself to be a person that gets up early and works out, or a person that stays late and takes a few extra hits, or you know meets up with a teammate to go over the game plan or what have you, if that's not part of who I think I am, well, it's going to be much more difficult to actually execute on the goal, right?
Mhm.
Because that's not part of my value system, my belief system. So we're really trying to have value-based goals. That's my whole point of that, right? It's just really knowing who we are, who we want to be, and then setting goals that are associated with that identity. And then, you know, because there's always room for improvement. There's always room to make some tweaks and adjustments. So even if we're performing well, what can I tweak or add on to my game? Or if I am struggling, okay, this is the kind of person I want to be. That I'm a person that deals with adversity. Great, that's your belief system. Now, what's a goal that you're struggling with that we can actually put some action steps towards? So, hopefully I mean, that's the first start of it, of a goal setting process, is really understanding values and beliefs.
Mhm. Yeah, and then, as far as kind of these techniques and skill development, I mean, one that I think you basically refer to a little bit, or at least a very related idea in your story at the beginning regarding the white blood cells and the healing,
Yeah.
the imagery. One that, yeah, I mean, something, and you can certainly describe what it is, but that can be such a powerful tool in all kinds of domains, right? All kinds of performance, but something that, I mean, I found some people are really able to tap into, others struggle to really connect with it or feel like it's a little harder. But yeah, what's that all about, and how might athletes use
Yeah,
that to their
so I'm
benefit?
going to combine the visualization with goal setting and the identity
Mm,
piece. So there's some research, and I can share with you the actual study, so you can maybe put into the show notes. But I'm blanking off the top of my head of the researcher that did this. But they had, with kids, put them in a room with a box that had, basically a bunch of keys, but you couldn't really unlock it. It was an unsolvable puzzle.
mm,
Right? And then they had a group of kids that just went in there as themselves, right? And then they timed them how long before they gave up, right? And then they had either the same kids or another group of kids pick a superhero, right? Who do they identify as in this moment? And they had the kid, some kids pick Batman, other kids pick Superman, other kids, Wonder Woman, right? And then they timed how long they took before they gave up. And then they asked them a very simple question, like, so how come you didn't give up? And well, I'm Batman. Batman doesn't give up, right? So
mhm,
as soon as they took on that identity, it started changing their behavior, and they worked longer and harder and tried more ways, right? Because that persistence was part of that identity of Batman.
mhm,
We pair that with visualization. I mean, you can imagine the imagination of a child. They're not just like, oh, I'm Batman, and how you and I as adults might think about, like, okay, yeah, it's cool, I'm dressed up as a Batman. No, they are embodying all the
mm,
characteristics and attributes of this person, because they're using their full force of the brain and the ability to imagine and create that picture in their mind, that they're they're not just acting like Batman, but they actually are Batman, right? And, you know, as an example, Beyonce Knowles, her Sasha Fierce character, I don't know if you're a Beyonce fan, but Sasha Fierce is somewhat of an alternate identity that she has, or
Right.
had. I think she has since retired, Sasha Fierce, but it was a way to help her that she didn't have to be the one out on stage. It was this alternate character, and she felt much more comfortable because Sasha Fierce could do anything. Beyonce Knowles was maybe a little more shy and timid, but Sasha Fierce was fierce, right? And so we can use visualization in that way to start helping ourselves with our identity. We can use visualization to improve skills, right? You can use, you know, picture yourself repeating a particular, you know, part of your sport and really get granular and look at your the way you're carrying the bat, or, you know, your stance, or whatever it is, your footwork, and you can really dissect using imagery to hone in on that visualization. And the research is telling us that it's not just that it's you're picturing in your mind, but you're actually reinforcing those neural pathways that are part of the actual physical attribute, right? So like you're not just picturing yourself, you know, pitching. The same muscles and neural connections that you're using to actually pitch when you're physically doing it are being triggered by that visualization. So, so here's some things to think about, right? There's a lot of, you know, pieces that you can use in terms of visualization. One is you want to incorporate as many of the senses as possible. So again, you're just trying to recreate the image in your mind. So sights, sounds, taste, touch, right? You even the sixth sense of emotions, right? Like just what you want to feel in that moment, and you trying to not just think about it, but be more like the kids that are embodying it and actually living that experience, right? Like, so if you're picturing yourself in a cold, you know, day, right, or a rainy day, you actually visually can start picturing that actually happening, and then maybe you're actually feeling some physical sensations from that imagery, right? You're not just trying to think of an emotion, you're trying to invoke the emotion, right? So meaning I'm not just thinking of a time that I was confident, I'm actually feeling confident, and my body is changing because I'm actually reliving that experience and that emotion. So that's one piece, is emotional. The other piece is you want to be able to control your images. So that's why a lot of times when you're doing visualization, you'll do some breath work beforehand. You'll take a couple deep breaths just to try to clear the mind. So that way, whatever pictures you have in your mind, you're able to control them, right? So you don't want to be dribbling down the basketball court and then all of a sudden, you know, an image of, you know, you eating dinner pops into your brain. That's going to mess up so you want to learn to control the images in your mind, right? And the way you start practicing that is by creating simple images in your mind, right? So 30 seconds, can I picture, you know, the ball bouncing on the court, right? And just kind of control that image before you just start like, let me picture a full play, right? You know, I'm running a particular offensive play. I want to be able to just control the ball before I start adding people and other dimensions and dynamics. But little by little, you can increase the complexity of your images. And then the third piece to think about, right? So you have all the senses, you have the controllability, and then the third piece is perspective. Two primary perspectives. So like I'm wearing GoPro, so I'm just picturing myself like what I'm doing. So I'm picturing my hand on the ball and bouncing. Or I can do like I'm watching myself on a big screen where I'm, you know, third person perspective. And they both have their benefits. You know, the first person is helping with timing and feel of a scenario. Where should I be on the court, right? Where do my feet look like, etc. Hand placement. The third person perspective is really helpful from a training perspective because now I can picture everything and I can make adjustments to what I'm doing. So controllability, senses, and perspective. Those are like some fundamental pieces to visualization.
Excellent. And so, you know, you refer to visualization and its benefits and the benefits it can have toward confidence, right? And, you know, and certainly, yeah, this is something for athletes to think about if that could benefit them in both sport and outside of sport, right? Particularly if you're playing an aggressive say contact sport, right, and you're your personality off the field is very different from that, right? To have, to put yourself into almost an alternate identity and way of thinking, and to kind of keep, the same way that an actor might, right, who's playing a particular role where they have to do things that are very, if they were doing these things in real life, they would find it objectionable, right? That you have to say, well, over here I'm this character, and over here I'm whoever I am, and that allows me to perform in the role that I'm in, and to not have that dissonance between, okay, it's hard to either focus or to feel like I can fully commit to it. Then also, as far as confidence, I think it makes some sense to potentially talk about confidence and building that skill in relationship also to the benefits of thinking about and learning from failure, right? And how there's so much to be learned from failures, and spending some time in thinking about like what the lessons learned are, but how that relates to building confidence and not seeing that as a threat, I guess.
And there's a lot of quotes around failure. For those of you that know Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan, there's a quote of his that he missed 10,000 shots, and that's why he succeeded, right? Indicating that you have to shoot your shot, and if you miss it, you can learn from it, but you're going to get better, and then that's how you improve, right? Muhammad Ali, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up, right? Like, yeah, we're going to get knocked down, but do we have the resilience to get back up, right? So we, in some regards, idolize failing, and then in other regards, we try to avoid it like the plague, right? And so practice is meant to fail, right? That's where you want to have the majority of your failures and try to minimize them in game time, right? But if we have an aversion to failure in general, then we might be missing those opportunities to learn within a practice environment, right? And this is true not just in sport. Like I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old daughter, and I tell them, I want you to take a practice quiz and fail it at home so you can learn from it. So that way, when you actually get in test day, you've already dealt with that. I don't want the first time you're learning that you don't know something is on test day. I'd rather you take 1,000 quizzes, Quizlet or whatever it is that you do, flashcards, and get those rapid failures, but don't view them as failures. Just you view them as learning opportunities. Okay, I didn't know that. Now I learned it, right? And continue to improve. Same thing with sport. I tried this, it didn't work. Okay, I'm in practice. That's what I'm here for, right? And so there's a couple things to unpack, because you start talking about confidence and failure. Some of it is, we have this in our society, particularly in the US, this idea around, self-esteem. We want kids to have high self-esteem. Self-esteem is important, critical to human thriving experience, but it's only one aspect of confidence. Self-esteem is a global perspective. I feel good about myself in general. I feel like I have support. I feel like I can take on challenges. When we start getting into the second part of confidence, or the way I like to talk about it, is self-efficacy, which is a more task-specific confidence. So I have high self-efficacy as a sports psychology consultant. I have lower self-efficacy as a basketball player, because I'm 46, 5 knee surgeries, carrying a few extra pounds, right? My game is not very good at basketball, but I'm okay with that, right? Because it's not my day-to-day job. I'm not trying to be an expert at basketball. So we can have varying levels of self-efficacy and still healthy self-esteem. And so sometimes coaches, in an effort to build somebody's self-esteem, will minimize the opportunity to learn from a failure, right? So then by doing that, we're also teaching kids that failure isn't good. It's okay. You'll get them next time. Versus, no, let's lean into this failure. Okay, we don't have to spend hours on it, but what happened? Talk to me. What went wrong? What's your perspective? Okay, what would you do differently? And really learning to evaluate the failure for what it is. Just a moment in time where we didn't do something the way we would like to, or something we didn't know, and now we're learning from it to then improve for the next time we're going to do those things. Right. But we parents in particular, and I'm guilty of this, I'm teaching these things, talking to you about it, but I've caught myself with my kids, like trying to make them feel better, after a failure, or because you don't want to see your kids hurting, right? So that's an instinct. So we have to fight that instinct and let them struggle a little bit, but give them the support they need to improve. Coaches, it depends on the coach, right? Some coaches can be very good at that and really providing really quality feedback when somebody does make a mistake or as a team makes a mistake. But it's also, some coaches don't, right? They can be too extreme on one end, or the other, right? It's either too positive or sometimes just focusing on all the things we're doing wrong, which is not helpful either. So there needs to be a deliberate effort at learning from failure. And, as opposed to viewing it as a failure, just, and this is semantics, but it can help, is viewing every opportunity as a learning opportunity. What did I learn in this situation? What did I learn in practice today? What did I learn from this drill?
Mm-hmm.
Did that drill go good or bad? That can go either way. But I can take some lessons learned from every single experience I'm having and starting to flip and change the perspective we have in terms of how we're viewing practices and even games, right? What am I learning? How am I getting better? What's my opportunity here?
Yeah. That brings up some good points, particularly around like the parents, the coaches, and the right types of support to provide, what is appropriate praise, or the like appropriate and but authentic definitions of what is failure and success, because there has to be some definition that's not just the macro being win or lose, right? Because there's a variety of other things in between there. I'm thinking about last night, I was watching one of those competitive cooking shows, right? And the one chef got done and said, if I lose on that round, I'm okay with it because I did the best I could. I didn't make mistakes. I did a great job. And if the other one, if they did better than I did, then they did better, right? And that's of course a concept for athletes to understand. Like, it's always competitive. There's certain times where you were prepared, you were focused, like you performed at a high level, and you still might not win. There's times when you may really not be your best and you may win that day, right? And at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're just okay with the outcomes. Everybody wants to win, but understanding there's a lot of other smaller pieces within that to say, okay, did you succeed in these ways? Where are the learning opportunities? And I imagine, it can look pretty different or be complicated between, maybe I'm an individual that's part of a team and I'm, my focus on like what are the controllables in my performance versus, let's say, I don't know, the 100-meter dash, and you may know I've run, that's the best time I've ever run, that's the best I can do, and I have no control over whether I win or not at that point. It's whatever anybody else does, but there's, it's a little more straightforward. But how, I guess, one, just to kind of try to summarize this a little bit for the athletes, right? As far as kind of focusing on the controllables within what success and failure is, but how to make that definition authentic, where it's not just like, oh, well, you always did great no matter what, because nobody wants to hear that, right? That's not going to ring true to them. And then for the people around them, particularly somebody who's like a parent whose job is to support them, but to do it in a way that is helpful versus, right when they're kind of out of tune with the feelings that their child is having, and it just doesn't have the desired effect.
So as always, right, there's layers to all of this, right? So one thing that you just said very quickly was around this, like the attunement part, right? Like right time, right place, right? Like if one skill that we could all develop, which would help us in all walks of life, is reading the room, right? If we can learn to read the room, we
Right.
can have better communication, right? And make sure we're on the same page with people. But it's a hard thing to do because we have our own perspective and then somebody else. And we're also, for parents, we want to, like I alluded to earlier, like we want to help our kids. So we like are jumping in and they're dealing with their own, way, and they have their own perspective of it. So one simple thing is to just be curious, like come to from a place of curiosity, and as opposed to like we know it or this is the thing that's going to fix it. Is what is going on? Help me understand what either what went wrong with the specific event or what went right. Right. So you talk about praise, like let's not just like, oh, good job. That's so broad. Like what was good about it? What can you take away from this experience so we can replicate it in the future? What didn't go well, right? So coming to things with a very curious mindset. And that also helps with the other, or one of the other pieces you were talking about is like, how do we focus on the controllables? Well, as humans, we're very prone to want to compare ourselves to others, right? So it doesn't matter if I did the best I've ever done, if somebody else did better than I did, right? Or I did this I ever did, but they kind of did almost as good as me, and I'm comparing myself there, right? So we as humans just naturally do that, right? Compare ourselves, right? They say comparison is a thief of joy, and social media does not help us because we're seeing the best versions of everybody's lives, right? So really it is learning to hone in on what is in my control. So the language I would use is mastery orientation versus outcome orientation. So focusing on getting good or becoming a master at your craft rather than worrying about a particular outcome, because we can't control outcomes, right? We can control what I'm doing today, what I'm doing this minute, what I'm doing in this drill, right? That's where I have a lot of control of my actions. By the way, it's tied very to the identity piece we were talking about earlier. This is the kind of person I am. I do these things, and these things, if we have skill and talents and certain attributes of who we are as both physical and as well as the mental side, if we do all the right things, we should start getting closer to the outcome we're looking for. But again, there's no guarantee. There might be somebody bigger, stronger, faster, more technically skilled, right? Whatever, right? Like there could be other factors, but if I could still have a very successful career if I focus on getting good at what it is that I do, right?
Yeah.
And so one way to do that is at the start of a practice is set a small intention. What's the goal? Like what would make this a success beyond a win or a loss, right? It's not just, oh, at the end of practice, we play a scrimmage or something. It's not whether I win or lose in that scrimmage. It's, I really improved my X. I really got better at Y, right? My focus was on footwork, and today I made strides in my footwork. I finally was able to do something I hadn't been able to do before. Or maybe it's incremental. It got a little better, right? Or even if it didn't, say it went completely off the rails and we're not really getting better, but at least we're learning what we shouldn't be doing, right? Okay, hey, that didn't work. That strategy was not the right strategy. But I can still feel like I'm improving and making strides, right? So I would start off by setting some, whether we call them goals or intentions, or even within a practice you can have, for this drill, my intention is X. And coaches can take that and say, this is my intention for this drill. A lot of times we're just running from drill to drill. We kind of know why we're doing this. Oh, we're getting better at passing or getting better at a particular skill. I also, in addition to getting better at the skill, I want this, I want to see all of us make, 1% improvement. So for each of us, maybe we have to think about what that looks like for us. But this is, I'm making strides. I got a little better. I was a little more consistent. I made, I used to be 2 out of 10 free throws, and now I'm 3 out of 10. Boom. I made a small improvement in my free throws this practice. So coaches, parents can also help with that by asking, maybe at the end of practice, what did you learn today? And really focusing on the learning part of things versus how did it go? Because that's what a lot of us ask at the end of a practice. So how was practice day? And what did we get? Good, bad, so-so. A more thoughtful, curious question. So to go back to the start of this answer, what's something that you learned today? What did you get better at? What did you fail at today? Right. And now you're getting a much richer discussion with your kids, right? Because you're learning a little more about them, like what they focus on, what matters to them. So you might gain a better connection with them. But in doing that, you're also going to be learning like, okay, this is becoming a pattern or a trend. They're always focusing on this part of their game. They're constantly bringing up their self-talk or or the way they describe things is very, unhopeful or unproductive. It's, man, I suck at that, or I'm a loser or whatever, right? I mean, those are extreme versions, but it could be more subtle than that. It could be just like, I'm really bad at backhands.
Mm-hmm.
And one time, I wouldn't necessarily like, oh, they got to go see somebody and work with somebody. But if that's a pattern of their thought, now that's going to start influencing their, the performance in the long term. So
Yeah. And I really hadn't thought about this before we started talking, but it is making me kind of curious about, if there is a baseline level of understanding of some of the mental part of the game, and that parents are discussing that with their child, just the discussions that are geared toward, right, that's also part of the child having ownership over their own participation in the sport, their own performance, if that might not change some perspectives toward the seemingly way too antagonistic type of attitudes people have toward coaches, and especially in the youth sports, right, where parents don't even want to volunteer to coach teams anymore because because it's like thinking that, okay, my kid's got to be the star, they're going to go play in college or pro, and understanding, look, if your child at whatever age they are isn't really focusing in on some of these things and having ownership over what their own participation is going to be, their own skill development, their own focus and attention, then that's much more important than blaming external factors and just jumping to thinking that it's about somebody else that's magically going to put everybody in position to succeed if they're struggling with some of the basics.
And so we, again, as a society, there's a broad general statement, but I've seen this to be true, is we impose our values onto others, and we even do that as with our own kids, or if we're a coach, and the word impose is the thing that I want to hone in on. It's fine to share our values and try to connect with people, and that's really ideal what we're trying to do. And so what I mean by that is, when we see our kids, as an example, struggling, we put our worldview, we put our years of experience, maybe if we played that same sport, well, this is what I did in that situation, right? Mm-hmm. And why don't you just do what I do, right? We think that, right? I'm a sports psychology consultant, so anytime my kids, say they want to get into something, I take out paper and we start goal setting, and they're like, whoa, I just said I like this thing, right? And I start imposing my values and beliefs and the way I would want, if I was in their shoes, that's how I would do it. I think we should, give our kids some credit. They know themselves, they know what works for them. And by giving them some autonomy, and some ownership, as you said earlier, mm-hmm. to their experience. And then through that conversation, that's when we can begin to coach and mentor, once we understand where they're coming from, versus you should set a goal for this, versus like, out of all the things I'm worried about in my particular sport, that's number 5. Mm-hmm. Number 1 is this. And they keep saying it in their own way. Like, this is the thing I want to get better at. And we're like, no, you need to do this. You need to do this. Just have those conversations with your kids, right? And be able to understand where they're coming from. Because as we all know, kids, adults, if we're not invested in it, we're not going to do it.
Right.
Even if we do it and we are able to force our kids to do something, they're not going to do it with the same level of energy, intensity, focus, drive, etc. Right? Yeah. So they're just going through the motions, not really learning. Everybody's motivated, right, to do something. It's really just trying to tap into what is the thing that motivates them. So, you want your kid to get better. Is why are they there? you want them to be a college athlete or a pro athlete, you want to get a scholarship, but they might just want to hang out with their friends. Well, leverage that. That's not a bad thing. But through that motivation that they're there because they're interacting with their peers, you can start leveraging some of these other ideas. Okay, well, hey, if this is part of, this communication, you want to be a good teammate. Well, being a good teammate is getting better. These are the things you need to get better. Okay, well, now I'm leveraging what already is motivating them rather than trying to force and use a carrot or a stick. I'm just tapping into their identity, the values, their belief systems to drive behaviors.
Yeah. And it just seems, like they're good life skills in general. And then certainly if young athletes are developing the mindset toward they have to earn it, right? I have to earn it first, and then the opportunities will come. If I'm 100% earning it and something, okay. But for the most part, as you move up in the levels, even if you're super talented, eventually you're going to get to the point where you will not get off the bench, right? Because there's going to be, whether it's, scholarship athletes in college, whether it's professionals, where everybody there is, it's almost life or death for them, and you have to take it from them if you're going to get the opportunity. The only way to do that is to 100% earn it for yourself. There's nobody can make it happen for you, and it's like that in so many areas of life where they're just good skills to develop, to learn what are the things I can do, how do I control that. Robert, the last skill I wanted to touch on is energy management, which is another important one, and one that I wanted to give you a chance to talk about.
Yeah. If I could just come back real quick to one point, is one of the things, one of the first days of grad school, my professor asked me, does sport build character or character disorders?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is it depends on the people around you. And to your point, right, of these are life skills, and people view sport as a way to help kids build character. Well, what character are we teaching them? Are we teaching them to be, sore losers? Are we telling them to win with pride, or to, what are we teaching our kids as coaches and as parents? And so that can go very many ways, right? You can develop perfectionist tendencies through sport, or you can develop, grit, perseverance, discipline, right? You got to earn it yourself. Work ethic matters. All these things that we love about what sport can teach us. Making sure that we're teaching those things, because no matter what, at some point, an athlete's career ends, whether it's the retirement, whether it's they didn't make it to the next level, whether it's, some other factor, right? Injury, some other reason, right? Just the talent pool was too great. So they're going to go into society, and they're going to be members of our society. What skills are we, giving them? And ideally, we're giving them the skills to be able to tackle whatever comes their way, right?
Yep.
And so there's a segue there to the energy management stuff, right? Which is, and I talk about this, not just stress management, but energy management, because sometimes we need to amp ourselves up, right? When we're talking about the identities, sometimes you're a different person in your sport than you are in your, in your classroom or with your friends, right? So how do I get the energy that I need for that particular sport, right? So there's this concept of, it's called the IZOV, or the individual zone of optimal functioning, right? And it's a bell curve, right? And it's performance with stress. And as stress goes up, performance goes up, and then you get to the bell part of the bell curve, and that's the sweet spot. That's where you have enough energy and focus and confidence, and you're performing at your best. And then there's a point where the stress becomes overwhelming, and the performance starts to decline. That's different for everybody, right? So you and me doing the same sport is going to have different levels of activation needed. And also for each of us, depending on the task, we're going to have, what I need for a test is different than what I need for a game, right? In terms of my stress levels, right? Maybe I need low stress for a test and I do well. Maybe I need higher stresses to get myself amped up. So energy management is the ability to manage my energy on the way up. So how do I get myself motivated one way, which we all probably use in some capacity, is music. Music is a great primer. Music, there are so many songs that if we hear it, puts us in a mood, right? And so knowing what music or what energy we need, we can leverage music. Breath work. So controlling the breath has an impact on the nervous system, which can help regulate that activation level, right? So if I'm really amped up and I need to be a little more focused, doing a couple deep breaths and to lower myself. But on the other end of the spectrum, you can use breathing to amp yourself up, right? I don't know if you know or familiar with the haka, what the All Blacks do, right?
Right.
There's a lot of chanting, but there's, if we were to pare that back, there's a lot of breathing in there, right? But that's activation level, right? So they want to be very intense, aggressive. So they're, part of the haka is a warrior, chant and dance, right? So they're using that to activate themselves, right? And it's a very deliberate, specific. You would never ask them to do a haka before, a test, because it's not the appropriate activation level, right?
Right.
Too amped up and too wired, right? So a lot of times we don't spend enough time talking about how to amp ourselves up. But then on the other end of the spectrum, this is where I spend a bulk of my time when I'm working with somebody on this side, is when they become overwhelmed by the situation and they need to lower that stress response. And that's where we start talking about it more, not energy management, but from a stress management. And by the way, some of the same strategies apply. Breath work, so taking a couple deep breaths, mindful of what we say ETA, energy, thoughts, and attention. What am I focused on, right? Am I focusing on my failure? Am I focusing on, what I need to do next, right? So we can control our focus. Mm-hmm. What am I thinking? Again, I can, change my thoughts. This is not about being positive. It's about being helpful. So if it could be a simple thought like, I got this, or it could be like, and some kids and myself included, sometimes we have like this devil angel on our shoulders and we're talking amongst each other and we might say stuff like, I'll show you, like, oh, you're not good at this, but this is all happening in our heads, right? Mm-hmm. And we can control that dialogue. And ideally we're ending with something that's more helpful. If you notice, I'm not saying the word positive.
Right.
It's sometimes just saying, I got this. And if we really don't, we're not going to trick ourselves. Like we're going to feel that. So we want to be honest with ourselves, but say things that are helpful. And then the energy piece is really more about that breath work. So one very simple breathing technique is called box breathing. It's sometimes I'll add this because the Navy SEALs, this is one of the things they teach them in high stress situations. And you breathe in the pattern of the box. So I'll just walk through just one round with you. It's very short. It's a 4-second inhale. So hold your breath for 4 seconds, right? So you come across, exhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds. So it's square breathing, box breathing. Your inhale, hold, exhale, hold. You just made a box, right? With your breathing pattern. 1 or 2 rounds of that. So you're talking about, 30 seconds, 32 seconds-ish of breathing can start having an impact on our nervous system. Either direction, right? Amping ourselves up or reducing that stress.
Excellent. Well, listeners, you can learn more at Robert's website, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. We'll put the links to all of those below. Robert, anything else listeners should check out or any final thoughts?
No, I guess my final thought would be sport is amazing, can teach us a lot of things. Well, there's a big emphasis on winning and losing. I would also emphasize the connections, the bonds you build. I don't care at what level I've worked at. We don't always remember the wins and losses unless we're winning like major championships, and we're going to remember those. We're going to remember a lot of the connections and the friendships that we built over those times, right? And you hear professional athletes say stuff like, yeah, I miss the game, I miss playing, but I also miss being around the guys or being on the field, right? So again, if depending on the age, we may not be thinking like that, but parents, like, support and foster the creation of those connections, because life is about connections. It's about relationships that we build, and the stronger bonds that we build, the more support system we have, and the better off we'll be, right? I care about performance. but human beings are also important, and sport is a way to build that in multiple ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great thought to end on. So everyone, yeah, check out the resources below. We'll put those links there if you'd like to learn more or follow Robert on the different social channels. If you are not already, please also do subscribe to Sideline Sessions. We'll continue to bring you conversations with diverse coaches and experts from across the sporting landscape. So thanks, listeners, as always, for being with us. And thank you, Robert.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.